much. It's always be back. Always great to be back in this kind of environment. One of the things that I have become more sensitized to in recent years as my life has taken some interesting turns is the function of energy. And in some sense, all of us really represent a flow of energy. And of course, energy can have all kinds of effects. It can lift you up or it can tear you down. And the energy at the United African Movement is an energy that time and time again, even under great duress, has a way of, shall we say, lifting us up, moving us to another level. In a way, I'm coming to you and talking to you at a time in my life when one is undergoing a transition. You might say a transformation. I think this has to do with what is happening as we near the end of the millennium, as we get to a place where the ages are in transition. And we find that individually and collectively, humanity is also in that very same transition. And we're at the place now when, in some sense, and it's coming from every different direction, that we don't have an unlimited amount of time to get ready for the transformation that's getting ready to happen. And it's going to happen whether you're ready for it or not. And so that's the reason why I like to say that the future belongs to the prepared. Now, when we say that the future belongs to the prepared, that means prepared on a lot of different levels. There's the intellectual preparation, the psychological preparation, and certainly the spiritual preparation. You have to understand the work that you do within is a lifelong task. It's something that you have to do from now until the time you die, and even then, it's unlikely that you're going to have finished it. And it is a daily task. It is a daily proposition. And if you're not willing to engage in that daily, minute-by-minute task of transforming yourself from within, then you are not serious. Because that is the only thing that's going to allow you to survive this transition, this transformation, such that the inner person becomes that which drives even the smallest, most routine acts, so that you perform them as impeccable exercises in completeness. So we have, as a people, you might say, directed our attention over the last 100 to 200 years in the dire struggle to recreate and take control of our external world. Perhaps history and our fate, you might say, has dictated that it be so. But you see, that's only half the battle, and you understand that battle is not even the most strenuous battle. That isn't even the most difficult battle. The most difficult battle is the battle or the struggle that you wage within to seize control of yourself. Because when you have control of yourself from within, there is nothing in the world that can control you from without. So that's the reason why I have found it necessary, shall we say, more and more to go within, to find that place of silence. We don't know silence. We don't understand silence. We always need noise around us, as if by this noise it will somehow keep us away from the very things that afflict us. It'll drown out those things that make our lives difficult sometimes. And yet, you're not going to find oneself, you're not going to find the transition, you're not going to find true knowledge except in that place of silence. And that silence is within. I would enjoin each one of you to try something this evening or tomorrow morning. Sit down for 5 minutes in a quiet place, in a dark place, and see how long, and see if you can clear your mind of all thoughts. Every single thought that you can possibly have. See how long you can keep your mind free of a thought. I'll bet you very few people will be able to do it for longer than 10 seconds. I've been trying for a year and a half, and as long as I can do is I can do it for about 25 seconds. To find every day that silent place where there's literally no thought coming in anywhere. Try it. There's nothing more difficult in the world, because we are imprisoned in some sense by our thoughts. And so our thoughts screen out that energy that allows us to transform ourselves. Now, we're going to talk a little bit also, we're going to talk about transformation in our discussion tonight. Our discussion tonight has to do with the African roots of Christianity. Because you see, once you understand Christianity in a certain way, what you now experience, know, and understand about Christianity is a travesty. It had absolutely nothing to do, or it today has absolutely nothing to do with what emerged out of the African spiritual reality when Christianity first came on the scene 2,000 years ago. It has, you know, in Africa, if you read African folklore, there's, or not just African folklore, you can find it in the folklore of traditional peoples all over the world. There is the story or the parable of the perverted message, where the Creator sends a messenger to the rest of his creation to tell them what he wants done. And the messenger perverts the message and tells them something entirely different. In some sense, the Christianity that you understand and know today is a function of a perverted message. For one thing, just the fact that there are 4 Gospels itself is a reflection of that, because we know of at least a dozen Gospels that were in place 1,800 years ago. We have evidence, shall we say, from other sources that Christianity flows as human life and human culture does out of the African heartland. The lands that we call Egypt or Kemet represented in some sense the mouthpiece, the cultural mouthpiece of the genius of Africa. It is where Africa, as it were, focused all of her creative energies. And you have to think about where humanity began. Humanity began in the, what we call the placenta land, the heartland, the womb of Africa, in the Great Lakes region. That is a placenta land. And then the Nile is really like an umbilical cord that connects the womb of Africa to Northeast Africa, indeed the world. And culture, humanity and culture literally followed that umbilical cord into the rest of Africa. And it's as if all of Africa's creative genius over periods of tens of thousands of years followed the flow of that river of life, concentrated itself in ancient Kemet as its mouthpiece. But it's more complicated than that. We're not going to have a chance to even get into this. You know that all the elders tell us that there were 4 civilizations before this one. Going back somewhere, some of them, the earliest one, maybe 500,000 years ago. But this is only the latest civilization. And some of those civilizations were worldwide civilizations, but they were always anchored, at least anchored. One anchor was always in Africa. Because, as the ancients say, power flows out of the south. And power and humanity and life is conceived in water. And my Native American friends tell me that there are 4 elements, 4 directions, and 4 colors, and 4 races. Native Americans are in charge of the earth. The European was supposed to be charged of fire, but he perverted that and turned it into firearms. The Asiatics are in charge of air, and the African black race is in charge of water. That's our element. That is what we are. That is why, if you look at all African creation stories, water is at the beginning and at the source of it. Because in the womb of the mother, what is life bathed in? It's bathed in the amniotic fluid, literally the ocean of life from within. That's the reason why women and mothers were always connected to water. And that's why water was really the essence of life. And when we violated our trust, water left us. This is the reason why Africa is so much of its desert. Because we violated our trust. We were the caretakers of water. Water is in everything we do. Though all of us like to be around oceans, lakes. Our spirits are usually water spirits. And since life comes out of water, when humanity first emerged, it emerged on the earth in the land surrounded by water, surrounded by lakes. And power flows out of the south. Always. Power flows out of the south. Now, Christianity, of course, is recognized, of course, to have come from Judaism in the Old Testament, on the one hand. Also, church historians will tell you that Greek philosophical influence also had a profound impact on the evolution and development of historical Christianity. The most outstanding example is what we call the concept of the Logos, or Jesus or Christ as the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The idea that the Word is what made creation happen comes directly out of an African context. Because you see, in the African framework, the Dogon say that the universe is a thought in the mind of the Creator. The ancient Egyptians say the same thing, because who is thought, mind, will, and intelligence? It is Thoth, Jehudi. So that is also, and Jehudi is also the personification of the Word. So the Word is what activates the thought of the Creator. And this is why ancient Hermetic philosophy says that this is a mental universe. And this is why in another lecture that I did here, I made the point that when you start looking at the fifth dimension beyond the four dimensions, the fifth dimension is consciousness, because the universe, the primal stuff of the universe is suffused with consciousness itself. The universe is alive and conscious and transcends the Einsteinian limit of the speed of light, 186,000 miles a second. So it is possible, once you are fully attuned to that awareness, which is the universe itself, to literally to really transcend the universe itself and go from one end of the universe back and forth. And everybody, by the way, in this room has that capability. It's just dormant, like a seed that hasn't grown yet. So the Word is just the personification of the thought that comes out of the mind of the Creator that makes the universe, that makes creation happen. And that the Greeks took that and inserted it into Christianity at a later time. But we are not here concerned. On the one hand, we can demonstrate, of course, the way in which Old Testament religion, known as Judaism on the one hand, Greek philosophy on the other, themselves descend out of the Nile Valley, or Nile Valley thought, Nile Valley consciousness. But we are not talking about those indirect ways in which the Nile Valley and Africa impacted Christianity. We're talking about the direct connection between Christianity, historical Christianity, and the Nile Valley or Northeast Africa, Northeast African civilization. In order to understand this better, we have to kind of understand the Osirian drama, the drama of Osiris. Because in a sense, Christianity really flows out of the Osirian drama. And if you understand the Osirian drama in its essence, you can in effect understand Christianity. In fact, the Roman Emperor Hadrian said that the worship of, he said this in 117 AD, he says the worship of those people who worship Serapis or Osiris are the, let me turn that around. Those who are Christians follow the worship of Serapis, which is a form of Osiris. Their worship is exactly the same. Well, let's look at this figure of Osiris. There are four actors, shall we say, in this drama, this Osirian drama. There is Osiris himself, his sister wife Isis, Horus, his son, and Set. Osiris is a very interesting deity because he is the god who became man. came down to earth and ruled Egypt or Kemet for 28 years. And 28 is a number that corresponds to the lunar cycle. And then after bringing peace, prosperity, and civilization to Kemet, went all over the world spreading the blessings of civilization. When he comes back, his jealous brother Set entices him in, holds a festival for him, entices him into a coffin, and then seals him up in a coffin and throws his body, the sealed body of the coffin, out into the Nile where it floats into Byblos, the land of the reeds. When Isis hears of this catastrophe, she begins her mourning, her grief, but also begins to search for the body of Osiris. While she is searching for the body of Osiris, what happens? She comes upon some children who tell her where the body went in the coffin. Now this is important because it becomes important later on. So remember this. It's the children that tell Isis where to find the body of Osiris. And when she finds the body of Osiris, or the coffin, a tree has grown up around it. Now you have to understand things about the tree. The tree is an image of growth. It is an image of creation, and it is an image of resurrection. So we'll come back to the tree. So you begin to see some imagery that will come back, and you will find it again and again in Christianity. Now let's also look something, two other things. When she finds the body of Osiris, she brings it back to Egypt, but before she can do anything with it, Set sees what has happened, grabs the body again, and then cuts it up into 14 pieces. Then Isis, faced with this new disaster, has to literally collect each one of the 14 pieces, reassemble the body, and reinvigorate it with the breath of life. Now, these 14 pieces of the body of Osiris, we've already talked about the 28 years. One of the things that Osiris is, he has a lot of different symbols. And one of the symbols is that he is the male moon. The symbol of the moon that has reached its fullness, the fullness of itself, and then the 14 waning pieces represent the 14 pieces of the body of Osiris. He is also identified with the grain. He is a male version of the grain. There is a picture of Osiris, and we will show it when we show the slides, where the grain is coming up out of his body. So what he is the dead Osiris, which represents the grain that has been cut down, harvested, plowed under, and then reborn. So that he is reborn in the new grain, which you use grain to do what? You use grain to bake or make bread. So symbolically, he is the new grain that supplies the flour to make bread, and so the body of Osiris is the bread. The bread is the body of Osiris. Now, he is also identified in the ancient Kemet system of the Nile Valley with the growing of grapes, because one of the things that he introduces to Egypt, according to the mythology, or the story, shall we say, the drama, is the cultivation of grapes and the making of wine. So that the blood of the grape, he is symbolic of the grape, so the blood of the grape is also the blood of Osiris. Now, what happens when the grape ferments? The grape ferments, it changes its character. It now becomes an intoxicant. In fact, what do we call the fermented grape? We call it spirits. So that the body of Osiris is the bread, and the blood of Osiris is the wine. As I said, he's also identified with the moon. And this becomes very important later on, as we shall see. And he is the newborn son, S-U-N, the resurrected son. His wife, his sister wife, is Isis. She is his female counterpart in every way, although Isis, as Aset, the womb and the tomb, is actually precedes Osiris. But at this stage of the myth, she becomes his sister wife. And she is identified, again, she is a female personification of the grain, of growing, of water, of earth, and the moon, and the stars. Sirius is identified with her. This is the reason why she is called the Queen of Heaven. She's also the virgin mother of Horus, because she conceives Horus after Osiris is dead and after she reinvigorates his life. So in a sense, Horus is a product of a non-human, therefore immaculate conception. Now, Horus is Heru. He is the son S-O-N, and he is the son S-U-N, who rises each morning and slays the dragon of darkness. But what we find is that Horus, the son S-O-N, is really merely Osiris reborn. So Osiris and Horus really are one single composite figure. So he represents the resurrected Osiris. Osiris who finds renewed life. And then finally there's a very interesting and enigmatic figure of Set, who is the great adversary. He is the one who sets himself against this holy family, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. His color is red, interestingly enough. His animal type is, one of his animal types is goat. So he often is figured with a tail and hooves and a horn in red color. Now Set originally is not demonic, because originally Set is actually a benevolent deity who brings peace and blessings to the world. But he becomes a fallen deity. His name Set also means fire, or the light of fire. And he is in this way entirely equivalent to Lucifer, because the name Lucifer means light bringer. And Set, in some sense, is also the original light bringer. He is also older than Osiris, so he is the firstborn, just like Lucifer is. Lucifer is the older brother of Jesus. Now, Set. We're not finished. Let's talk a little bit more about Set. You see, because what Christianity has done is polarize things. Absolute good and absolute evil. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. God created both God. What you have done, what has been done with the devil, is that they've turned God inside out. That's all they've done. They've taken God and turned him inside out, or upside down. And that's your devil. Now, let's talk about Set. We talked about his imagery, right? Set, and then there's a word on. On means to repeat or double. So Set on is the second or repeated Set. Satan is therefore the second manifestation of Set. Do you know what else? Set is actually Santa Claus. Why? Set is the oldest male deity in the pantheon. He is identified, and the oldest deities are put in the northern planisphere, because Egypt or Kemet is in the northern hemisphere. The oldest deity is actually Ta-Urt, the hippopotamus goddess. And her son, S-O-N, and consort is Set. So he controls the northern heaven. And what is the Christmas tree? The Christmas tree is nothing more than the North Pole. And the star at the top of the Christmas tree is the North Pole star. And the lights on the Christmas tree are the stars that revolve around the pole. And you see, Set originally was the giver of peace and plenty. And he is also the origin of Satan, who was also called Old Nick. Old Nick is also Saint Nicholas, who was a Dutch figure who used to give presents to all the children with a helper. And you know what that helper's name is? Black Peter. All the symbolism is there. The Christmas tree, the stars, the lights, the pole, the giver of peace and plenty, the red coloration, Saint Nick, Old Nick, Set. He's Santa Claus. He is both Santa Claus and Satan. Can you get to that? Now, it just shows you that this polarity, this polarization between good and evil, this opposition, is part of the problem. It doesn't help you it doesn't help you understand the dynamic interplay between forces when you polarize things like that way. Now, let us now go to another aspect of this issue. We've already talked about Osiris, Horus, who are together the sun, S-U-N. Jesus himself is called the sun, S-O-N, but he's also called the sun, S-U-N, the sun of righteousness, the sun who shines on those who sit in darkness. So he is a personification of the sun, S-U-N. The original birth date of Jesus was January 6th, which is the reason why we have the 12 days of Christmas. On the first day of Christmas, my true love sent to me, you know that one? The reason why you have 12 days of Christmas is because the church fathers deliberately took that day, January 6th, as the birthday of Jesus and moved it back 12 days to December 25th. Why did they do that? Because the birthday of Osiris and Horus is December 25th. Why? You have to understand the allegory and the symbolism of the sun and its movements, S-U-N. The solstices and the equinoxes. There are two solstices and two equinoxes. Summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, the sun is at its height and its most powerful. In the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere is at its lowest ebb. Then there's a spring equinox and the autumn equinox when it's equal. We'll talk about that. What happens to the sun, S-U-N, on its ecliptic path from December to June and back again? Well, let's take what happens in December. December 22nd, the sun, S-U-N, is at its lowest ebb on the horizon. It is at its lowest ebb. It stays there for 3 days. At about 12:30 to 1 o'clock on the morning of December 25th, the sun, S-U-N, begins to rise on the ecliptic. What does that mean? It slowly begins to rise on the horizons. That means if you could stay in one place every noon, you would watch the sun. Every day it would climb up a little bit higher on the horizon so that by summertime it's right above you or very close to being above you. So it begins that rise, and this is perceptual. It begins that rise early on the morning of December 25th. So the sun, S-U-N, can be said to be, shall we say, born on December 25th. 2,000 years ago, when that was happening, on the eastern horizon, as the sun, S-U-N, began its rise on the ecliptic path, Virgo was on the eastern horizon. So the sun could said to be born of a virgin, the constellation Virgo. Not only that, on the western horizon was the constellation Taurus, in which is Auriga, the stables. So he was born of a virgin in the stables in a major. S-U-N, as it began its rise on the horizon. There is and I'm going to show these slides toward the end. There is a panel that is found in the Temple of Luxor, although it's locked away, which shows the Pharaoh being born. His mother is Mut-Emwa, mother of the one, just like Mary was the mother of the one. And the Pharaoh was a human personification of Horus, so it was a divine birth. And in one panel, in what you see the Annunciation Thoth coming and tell Mut-Emwa, mother of the one, that she is getting ready to give birth to a divine child. In the second panel, you see the actual birth of the child, in the third panel, you see the actual incarnation, the breath of life, the divine incarnation, the divine breath of life being given to the mother in an immaculate conception. In the third panel, you see the divine birth. In the fourth panel, you see the adoration of the gods. So you see the birth, in conception. You see the annunciation, conception, birth, and adoration of the child on a panel on an ancient Egyptian temple 1,500 years before the birth of Christ. They had already enacted it. Now, let's also look at what happens to the sun, S-U-N. We already talked about the ecliptic path. The sun begins to rise on the horizon. It takes 6 months for it to get to June 21st. Before it gets to June 21st, it gets to a part about March 21st, where the ecliptic path of the sun crosses the celestial equator. The celestial equator is the equator of the earth projected into space. So that when the sun crosses the celestial equator, it seems to sit there for 3 days. Now, that is what you might call the crossification or the crucifixion of the sun. Or you might call it the passing over, the Passover of the sun over the celestial equator. Now, you see, the sun has been slowly getting more and more, getting stronger and stronger and more potent as it moves up on the ecliptic. When it passes the celestial equator passes over or crosses the celestial equator at the spring equinox, day becomes longer than night. So the power of the sun exceeds the power of night. The sun, therefore, has undergone a second birth or a rebirth. Now, interesting. We have said that the sun, S-U-N, is Osiris and Horus. We've already said that Osiris is also identified with the moon. Well, how do you determine Easter in this culture, in Western culture? It is the first, it is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the equinox. So it is tied to both a solar event and a lunar event. So it's both a solar and a lunar event. Osiris has solar aspects, and he also has lunar aspects, or moon aspects. We've already talked about the 28 years of his reign, the 14 waning phases of the moon. Osiris is also the hare or the rabbit, because the hare is called Un, and it is called Un, and Osiris is called Un-Nefer, the good being. Because why is Osiris identified with the hare or the rabbit? Because the rabbit jumps up or rises up. Osiris rises up in his resurrection. That's why the hare is a symbol of his resurrection. So therefore, the rabbit, the Easter bunny, is no more than Osiris. The hare is also a lunar animal. It's identified with the moon. So the Easter bunny is in effect Osiris. The Easter egg hunt. Who participates in the Easter egg hunt? The children. Why? Because they are the ones who told Isis where to find the coffin and the body of Osiris. So they're the ones that participate in the Easter egg hunt. And the egg itself is a symbol of new birth, and particularly the golden egg and the silver egg. The golden egg is the son that is in the process of undergoing a rebirth, and the silver egg is the moon of Easter. And the Easter chick, you see chicks coming out during Easter. Why? Because what is another symbol of Osiris that comes out of the golden egg of the sun? The Bennu bird, or the golden hawk. That's why you have the Easter chick. Even the 6 weeks before, the 40 days of Lent, when you have hot cross buns. What is that? The cross on the hot cross buns represent the crossification of the sun over the equator. The other thing, you have to understand something else. Jesus' ministry was not just an earthly ministry. It was also what you might call a celestial or heavenly ministry. You see this in a couple of different places in the New Testament. First of all, the Pharisees are questioning Jesus and his ministry. And he says of them, they says, show us a sign that you are who you say you are. And Jesus said, this is a wicked generation. It demands a sign, and the only sign I will give it is the sign of Jonah. Now, Jonah is the fish man. Now, in order to understand that, we have to go back into another celestial phenomenon known as the Great Year. We've talked about this many, many times, and we've written about it several times. Let's review it. The Earth, as it spins on its axis, is not spinning straight up and down. It tilts. Because of the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon, it tilts 23.5 degrees. So like a top, when it spins like this, it wobbles. So there are two north poles. There's a vertical north pole called the North Pole of the ecliptic, and a tilted north pole called the celestial north pole. And because the Earth spins like a top, it wobbles. The tilted north pole, the celestial north pole, describes a circle around the vertical north pole that takes 26,000 years. That is something called the Great Year, discovered in Africa anywhere probably 30 to 50,000 years ago. Now what these ancients did, they took this circle and divided it into 12 arcs. In each arc is 2,160 years, because if you take 2,160 years and multiply by 12, you get 26,000. So you divide 26,000 by 12 arcs, you get 2,160 years. In each of these arcs, they sort of configured a constellation with a name, a symbol, a history, and a spiritual presence, so that each one of these arcs defined an age. The beginning of the age always starts in the summertime in the time of Leo, about 10,858 years ago. For 2,160 years, the equinox, the sun rises on the equinox in the sign of Leo. That makes it the age of Leo the lion. But after 2,160 years, the lion as a constellation falls below the horizon, and the one that comes up behind it is Cancer. Or actually, Cancer is really the scarab. And that defines the age for another 2,160 years. After that, it falls below the horizon. What rises in after that? Gemini, the twins, Horus and Set, 2,160 years. That falls below the horizon. What rises in its place? Taurus, the bull. This is dynastic Egyptian history. This is the reason why Ptah was a bull god and Osiris was a bull god. 2,160 years later, the bull falls below the horizon. What rises in its place? Aries, the ram. This is the time of the birth of Judaism. Now, when Moses was on Sinai, and he came down with the tablets of the Ten Commandments, and the Hebrews had constructed the golden calf, why do you think he was angry? He was angry because what had saved the children of Israel, according to the Bible? The blood of the Lamb. The blood of the Lamb had saved the children of Israel because this was the age of Aries. And the lamb and the ram and shepherd symbolism dominated that age and became the symbol of the sacrifice and renewal and saviorhood. The bull, or the calf, was an old avatar as time had passed. And yet these people were comfortable. They were not ready to give up, according to the Bible, their connection to their ancient Egyptian life. And so, for that familiarity's sake, they resurrected this old but now obsolete avatar, which was the golden calf, or the bull, which was no longer operative. In fact, the word name Aaron was his brother who constructed the golden calf. In Egyptian, his name is Aren, which means, literally bull calf. child bull. So he was a priest of the ancient deity whose symbol was the bull. And he's the one that constructed the golden calf. And so during the age, so you can see that the ancient avatar of the bull, you might say, spilled over into the age of Aries. But it was the lamb and the ram and the shepherd symbol. This is when the shepherd symbolism becomes very powerful during this period. 2,160 years later, the ram goes below the horizon. What comes up 68 BC? The fishes, Pisces, the two fishes. And yet the lamb symbolism abides, right? Because they continue to call Jesus the Lamb of God. But when Christianity rears itself, it is in the age of Pisces. So what Jesus is saying is he's saying that this ministry is tied to celestial events. And the dominant celestial reality now is that which is defined by the age of the Pisces, the two fishes in heaven. Which is why you have this fish symbolism. Come now and I will make you fishers of men. The fishes and the loaves. Why the early Christians were called pisciculi. Now, in about 90 years, Pisces will drop below the horizon at the equinox. The constellation that will then rise and dominate for the next 2,160 years around the celestial equator will be Aquarius. But you got to understand what Aquarius was. Aquarius is called the waterman, interesting enough, but in the Nile late, he was Hapi, the river Nile, but he was shown with a female breast. Why? Because originally Aquarius, the waterman, was actually the great mother of the waters, Hathor Nut, the great mistress of the waters. And all of your deities, your mother powers that have a significant connection to water, Yemanya, Urzuli, Kumbalamba, Salmon Lady, Isis, their power now is becoming paramount again. It's dictated by what heaven is giving you. Heaven is a book. The heavens are a book. If you know the language, you can read it. And you can know what is happening and why it's happening. So when Jesus said, this is a wicked generation and demands of me a sign, the only sign I will give it is a sign of Jonah. He was talking about the fact that this was all taking place under the sign of the fishes in the age of Pisces. Further on it says, there will be portents in heaven, and the sun, moon, and stars will be shaken, and the sun, moon, and stars will be shaken, and the celestial powers will be shaken. This is a reference to the change in age, the transition in age, the transformation in age, because the transformation from one age to the next, you have a breakdown of the old system to make way for the new dispensation. This is what's happening right now. If you want to understand what's going on around you, learn to read the book of heaven. And it's there for anyone to read. Now, the whole symbolism of the cross. The cross has several different kinds of, has a symbolism on several different levels. On the one hand is the crossing of the sun on its ecliptic path across the equator, the crossification or the crucifixion of the sun. It is also the symbol of the unity of human and divine, which is why in West African civilizations everything of all the numinous power is concentrated at the crossroads. It is also the symbol of resurrection. It is the backbone of Osiris, the Tet cross. The raising of the Tet cross was originally a tree. And so the raising of the Tet cross is the raising of the backbone of Osiris, and it recalls the tree that grew up around his coffin. The original cross was actually a tree, the tree of life, the tree of resurrection. And according to the Acts of the Gospels, Jesus wasn't crucified like that in the Roman fashion. He was actually hanged from a tree. Now, let's talk about another Piscean manifestation, another Piscean disposition. If you look at the Dogon talk about the 8 Nomo. The most important one for human consideration is the Nomo Anagono, which means fish man. And he was sacrificed himself to counteract the effects of the bringer of chaos and destruction. And he was sacrificed, and as part of his sacrifice, this fish man was spread out on the kalena tree in heaven just like this. This is the Dogon conception. In some sense, the true meaning of the Piscean age and the true meaning of the Piscean dispensation is much better and more faithfully preserved in the Dogon system than it is in Christianity. In it, you see there's a notion of sacrifice, always sacrifice. Jesus was a human sacrifice. And what did he say? He said, my flesh is real food, my blood is real drink. He who eats and drinks in me, he dwells in me and I dwell in him. And some of you have been to First World and you heard Grey Wolf, the medicine man from northern Alaska. And you know what he says about a blood sacrifice? He says, particularly someone who sacrifices themselves to the medium of blood, what blood does, blood is the river of life. It is what life flows through that keeps the life force in you. And when you let that life force out, it takes your prayers out into the universe. So by being this blood sacrifice, Jesus was taking the prayers for all humanity out into the universe to make way for this new dispensation. This in some sense, sacrifice is an exchange of energy, because that's all life is one energy form interrelating to another energy form. And Jesus was that. He was a living sacrifice who, by the shedding of his blood, one thing was sending his energy out into the universe. But he was also literally giving his life to renew the life of those who followed him, as did Osiris. So this image of sacrifice is fundamental to all religious conceptions, and it is at the heart of the beginning of Christianity. And so every time you go to church and you partake of the Eucharist, the body and blood of Jesus Christ, you are participating in that sacrifice. A couple of other things. Jesus, the name Jesus, Christos, Christ. The word Christ comes from the Greek Christos. They got to understand, there is no precedent, there is no antecedent in the Greek language for the word Christos. It only appears in 290 BC during the time of Alexandria in the Greek language. It derives from the ancient Egyptian or Kemet word karast or karist. The karast was the mummified body of Osiris. The mummified body of Osiris meant that he was washed and anointed in oils, wrapped in linen bandage, and stood up as an image of resurrection. And so the mummified body of Osiris was the anointed body of Osiris as the karast. This finds its way into the Greek language 290 BC as Christos, which means the anointed one, who Osiris was. When Jesus is crucified, Joseph, finally, when he dies, Joseph of Arimathea comes and takes his body down, and what does he do? He washes it, He anoints it in oil and wraps it in linen bandages. He turns Jesus into a mummy, a Christ, a Christ, a Christos. Jesus does not become the Christos until he is crucified on the cross on Calvary. Because at that moment, that is when his human and divine natures fuse. That's the other importance of the cross. That crossing fuses those two natures at the crucifixion on Calvary. Calvary means skull, Calvarium. Golgotha means skull. Because the equator itself is like a rounded skull into space, a rounded Calvarium. And so when the sun crosses, it crosses on this skull, on this Calvarium. It is also, the skull is what? That is where, in the pharaonic representation, is where the Uraeus serpent arises, which is a symbol of the awakening of the awakening of the self. The transformation of the self. Because the transformation is what has occurred on the cross. Man becomes God. And therefore is the anointed one, is therefore the Christos. And the reason why the Egyptians were the first country, as a whole country, to convert to Christianity is because Christianity, as it was emerging, was a continuation of a 10,000-year-old religion. It was their religion. That is the reason why the first priests, the first bishops, the first church structure, the first church liturgy, the first monks, the first monastic tradition, all took place in Egypt and later on in North Africa. It isn't until until Constantine takes Christianity over as an instrument of state policy that Christianity turns from an African religion into a Roman and thence a European one. I'll tell you a couple other things. It is said that Jesus didn't really die the way they said he did. They said there are those who say he lived about 125 years. Mary Magdalene was not a harlot. She was one of his most important disciples. Because remember, who saw Jesus first? Mary saw Jesus first when he resurrected. Not John, not Peter. It was Mary and Mary Magdalene who saw Jesus first. They were there at his resurrection. Peter is said to have lived actually 300 years, believe it or not. All of them were products of temple training in Kemet, including the Christos. All of them. The name of the historical person that we can identify with Jesus is Joshua, or Jeshu ben Pandera, which means Joshua or Jeshu, son of the panther. Now you got to understand, the priests of Kemet wore the panther skin as a badge of office, as an emblem of their role and function as priests and high priests, particularly the high priest. So to call Jesus, say Jesus, son of the panther, it was saying Jesus, son of the priesthood. Because he was born and raised, he may have been born in Palestine, but he was raised in northern Egypt among the Therapeutai, who were a branch of the Essenes. The Therapeutai were the Essenes who, in their connection with the Egyptian temple and other Pythagorean temples, had mastered the art of curing and healing. That's why Jesus, the reason why he attracted so much attention is because of his capacity, his prowess as a healer. That's how he was trained in Egypt and among the Therapeutai. That's what they call them, Therapeutai, healers. When we lost the Nile Valley civilization, we lost a lot. Almost everything. The reason being is because, you see, you had a nation run by adepts, a civilization run, controlled by adepts, whose job it was to maintain the homeostasis, who with other adepts strategically placed in other parts of the world to maintain the homeostatic and harmonious balance that governed the entire earth. And so when the adepts no longer could do that, the earth itself, the earth itself became vulnerable. The episode of Jesus, the Christos, and Christianity was a continuation of a tradition that goes back at least 10,000 years and maybe 30 to 40,000 years. The message, however, got perverted. Let's look at one or two other things, and then we'll look at some slides. Let's listen to the veritable history of Satmi Kamois. This is an Egyptian story relating to the works and deeds of a marvelous child. This is an Egyptian story now, a Kamite story. Now Satmi slept one night, and this is his father, and dreamed a dream. One spoke to him, saying, "Thy wife, who has conceived by thee, the infant she shall bear shall be called Senosiris. And many will the wonders that he will perform in the land of Egypt." When Satmi awoke from his dream after having seen these things, his heart rejoiced greatly. When the month of pregnancy were fulfilled, his wife brought into the world a man-child. And it came to pass, when the little Senosiris was 1 year old, one would have said he is 2. When he was 2, one would have said he is 3. So vigorous was he in all his limbs. He was sent to school. And in a little time he knew more than the scribe who had been giving him his master. The little child, Senosiris, began to read the books of magic with the scribes in the double house of the life of the temple of Ptah, and all who heard him were lost in astonishment. When the little boy Senosiris was 12 years old, there was no scribe or magician in Memphis who equaled him in reading books of magic. Judging from his name, Senosiris obviously is Osiris. The word Sen in Egyptian means image or likeness, so that Senosiris literally means the image of Osiris. His father's prophetic dream sent by divine agency is repeated in Matthew, where the angel of the Lord tells Joseph in a dream of the pending birth of a divine child conceived in his wife Mary by the power of the Holy Spirit. Senosiris, the marvelous youth of 12, whose learning and wisdom outstrips those of his masters, is encountered again in Luke, where the 12-year-old Jesus is found in the temple discoursing with all the learned doctors, wise men, and priests, astounding them with his knowledge. The near identity of the two stories cannot be coincidental. They even lifted, Christianity even lifted stories, episodes, parables out of the wisdom tradition of ancient Kemet and just plopped it right down into Christianity. Okay, I think the next thing I'm going to do, let's go to the one last thing before we go to the slides. We have already noted that the Virgin Mary is but a late form of the Virgin Isis, but even Mary's name has an Egyptian etymology. The equivalent word for Mary in Egyptian is Meri, M-E-R-I, which means love or beloved. And one of the forms of Isis is Mary Fwa, a guardian of Osiris, whose name means his beloved one. Isis is also linked to the goddess Hathor, who is known as Hathor Mary. Hathor is Het Her, meaning the mansion of Horus or temple of Horus. And she may have been an earlier mother consort of Horus than even Isis, and one of her zootypes is a dove. She's a dove. And in John, the Gospel according to John, the Baptist tells us that he saw a Holy Spirit coming down on the head of Jesus in the form of a dove. So even the Old Testament, which has turned the Trinity into a totally masculine framework, shows, shall we say, echoes of the original motherhood that was part of the Trinity. Let's turn on some slides. One of the things I just want to show you is that one of the things that we can say about the lands of Palestine, the lands of the Bible, they are not. There is not now, nor has ever been any such thing as the Middle East. What we call the Middle East is really Africa's northeast extension. Geographically and geologically, that is exactly what it is. So it should come as no surprise that the first people that you find in what we call the Middle East, in what is now Palestine, are people who were black and African. They're called the so-called Natufians, who can be dated back minimally to 10,000 years ago, and whose presence can be seen in the Middle East really up until the present day. Now, the point that I'm making here is that you look at these people. These are from Nippur. Again, look at these figures from the so-called Middle East, from the Mesopotamia, from Sinai, from Palestine. This is Astarte, one of the goddesses of the so-called Middle East. Notice her hairstyling. There were both mixed or so-called, quote, mulatto cultures and civilizations in the so-called Middle East, Mesopotamia, and there were those who were unmixed black cultures and civilizations. One was called Elam, whose capital was Susa. And it was excavated in 1894 by a Frenchman named Jules Lefort. And this part, and it was so characteristically African that the Greeks used to refer to Susa or Elam as Eastern Ethiopia. Now what you find here are examples of the 10,000 immortals. These were the guardians and protectors of the king of Susa, all black African warriors, the 10,000 immortals. Now Susa is where Persia is now, or Iran. This is Assyria. Note the Egyptian motifs that permeate throughout the so-called Middle East, as well as the coloration of these figurines. You look at these people with these peppercorn hair, etc. Pretty clear what we're looking at in terms of ethnic derivation. These are Jewish captives, 600 BC in Assyria. We haven't even talked about the people. There was an exodus, but it was an exodus of people who were Africans. The people who became the Hebrews of history were originally people who had to leave Egypt. The point is that when you look at the lands of the Bible and you look at them carefully, you can't look at the Prime Minister of Israel today and get a sense of what Palestine looked like 3,000 years ago. This is a form of Osiris. Note the name. That name is pronounced Yah, because this is the original form of Yahweh. Yahweh means, Yah is the moon. Way means to increase, the increasing moon. Yahweh was a form of Osiris as the increaser. So even Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, is taken, literally lifted bodily out of Kemet. This is Osiris, the mummified form of Osiris, who we've already mentioned. His wild and limited advantage, and the anointed in his upright or resurrected form, who has conquered death and becomes a hope of resurrection for all humanity. This is Osiris with wheat growing from his body. The whole point is that he represents the, in his resurrectional aspect, he is the growing grain, the growing wheat, whose death gives new life. whose death renews life. And therefore, the wheat, when it gets turned into flour and then into bread, becomes a facet of the body of Osiris. And this is Osiris seated in the roof from which hang grapes, because again, he is the one who is said to have been, who has introduced the cultivation of grapes to ancient Egypt, and also therefore the production of wine. So he symbolizes the grape, and the blood and the juice of the grape is also a symbolic of the blood of Osiris. This is Osiris with his sister wife Isis. She is the one, originally, she is the one who is involved in the resurrection, or the reconstitution of his body, and therefore of his resurrection. This is Horus in his falcon aspect. He is the golden falcon. The golden falcon is a symbol of the sun, S-U-N, that rises every morning and conquers the dragon of darkness, who is Set. This just shows you Horus rising from Osiris at the command of Atum. It shows you the intimate, inextricable connection between Osiris and Horus. Horus is just, you might say, a form of Osiris. Osiris is a form of Horus. Horus is Osiris in his rebirth, Osiris reborn. Osiris is Horus in his eternal form. So Horus and Osiris in some sense are composite. And this is the original Holy Family. This is Set, the original adversary, the fourth actor in the drama. You see, what you have to understand is the significance of the number 4. 4 is an extraordinarily powerful number in all traditional systems, particularly the African. The reason why it's so powerful, one of the reasons why it's so powerful, you find it, by the way, in the Ifa divination system, in the Yoruba system, in the Dogon system, in Native American systems. Again and again, you find the power of the number 4, because 4 is the number of completion or totality. But what you often find is, and that's the reason why in Timaeus, there are 3 of his pupils that come to visit Socrates, and Socrates asks, where is the 4th? Because the 4th is the completer. But the 4th is always different from the other 3. The completer always. There's always 3 that are alike or similar, and the 4th is always something different, and sometimes even antagonistic, but the 4th always makes that, but that is what you need for the completion or the totality. 4 is also the number of the square and of the circle, and of the sphere in particular. And 4 is also the female number. 3 is the male number. The triangle and the pyramid are, well, the pyramid is a figure of 7, which combines male and female. 3, which is male, 4, which is female. Triangles, 4 triangles on a square base. So you have united 3 and 4 into 7. That's why it is such a sacred and mystic number. So Set is the 4th. That completes the Trinity. This is the precession of the equinoxes. This just shows you the method by which the Earth tilts on its axis, and while it is spinning, wobbles in a 26,000-year circular path around the vertical or north pole of the ecliptic. We've talked a little bit already about how in that eclipse, how the 12 arcs were created to define the zodiac. This is the Osiris in his manifestation as the bull of the deity, whose symbol is a bull, 4200 BC. This is when Hapi, Ta, and Osiris take on bull forms. This is when Osiris makes a significant appearance in Egyptian history. Later on, he becomes the personification of the ram, lamb, and the shepherd, 2200 BC, with the beginning of the age of Aries, or the ram, which is also the era in which Judaism comes to the fore. And as we already said, lamb, ram, and shepherd symbolism dominate Jewish symbolism, as they do the symbolism around the city of Thebes or Waset, whose patron deity is Ammon, whose symbol is the ram. This is 68 BC. Horus, as symbolized as Pisces during the age of the fish, whose age is gradually coming to the close, and is the age in which Christianity makes its appearance. And significant is that we see here the four who are fishers for Horus, prototypes of the first four disciples of Jesus, to whom he said, "Come, I will make you fishers of men." This is as I described earlier, this is a panel seen on the wall of a chapel in the temple of Luxor in what is now Thebes, or Luxor, that is now locked and closed off to the public. On the far left, you see the Annunciation of Thoth to the Divine Mother, that she will give birth to a divine son who is Pharaoh. She is called Mutemwa, Mother of the One. In the second panel, you see Kneph, who is, you see Hathor in front, who is the goddess of birth, and Neph, who is divine breath, and symbolizing the conception of the mother by a divine agency. The top right panel, the mother sitting in the birthing chair, giving birth. And on the lower panel, you see the child, and you see the deities, the netters, adoring him and bringing him gifts. So here you have the Annunciation, Conception, Birth, and Adoration of the child, 1700 BC. Remember the story of Lazarus. Lazarus dies. His two sisters, Martha and Mary, come to Jesus and ask him to come and minister to Lazarus, their brother, who has died. And he says, I am the way and I am the life. And he comes to Lazarus and says, Lazarus, rise and comes forth. Well, you break Lazarus' name down. Lazarus' name fundamentally is Azar, which is Asar or Osiris. El in front of Lazarus gives you the article, which means the. As, or us, is means to call or call forth. Lazarus means literally the Osiris called. This is Osiris in the in this prototypical form, and here is Osiris. Here is Horus telling Osiris, rise up and come forth. So even the figure of Lazarus is a Osirian figure. Okay, last few minutes that we have here. One of the things, when Egypt passes from the world stage as a significant country and becomes merely a province of Rome, the one thing that survives and is passed on to the rest of the world, among other things, or the most important thing, is the religion of Isis. Isis, although her ceremonial and worship is the center of her ceremony and worship is in Philae in Upper Egypt on the border of Nubia, her worship passes into the Roman Empire and becomes one of the, if not the most important religion in the Roman Empire, even surpassing in some sense the worship of Jupiter. This is actually a Roman fresco showing dancers worshiping Isis. And you notice that the dancers, as well as the priests, you can see the ibis deities at the bottom. Those are representative of Thoth, and the bottom are Egyptian netters. You see the Apis bull, you see Thoth in the form of the cynocephalic ape, and you see these dancers and musicians, drummers, and priests were all imported from Nubia and Africa in order to perform the Isaic ceremonials in Rome. And this is just a close-up. This is a fresco from Pompeii. Again, a ceremony and ritual dedicated to Isis. Notice again that the priests, the officiants, are Ethiopians, as you see here. Now, what's the point? The point is, it didn't just stop in Rome. Roman legions took the worship of Isis all over Europe, wherever they conquered, and established shrines to her, 1,000 shrines to her in Europe. They became the most important centers of worship throughout Europe, so that when Christian missionaries came into Europe in significant numbers in the 4th and 5th centuries and found the deep-seated loyalties that the people had to the worship of Isis and her infant son, Black Horus, they didn't try to destroy her worship. They were in the process of trying to win converts. But they did something very interesting. All they did is say, okay, this is now the Virgin Mary and the child Jesus. So that's the source of the origin of the black virgin and child all over Europe. So when the Pope goes to Poland and worships the black virgin and the black Jesus, he is essentially worshiping the African goddess and her child. And these are the black virgins. There's 400 of them still throughout Europe. It used to be 1,000. This is in Spain. This is Isis. This is in Poland, Russia. They even preserved in the child Jesus the kinky hair. For nearly 700 years after the beginning of Christianity, there was no representation or very few representations or likenesses of the man Jesus. Only a couple survived. This is one of them on the left-hand side. Note the hairstyles and the facial features. This is Jesus. This is a coin of Justinian in the 6th century. On the obverse side, again, is this figure of Jesus. Again, note the hair. What they used to say, it was hair like the wool of the lamb. You can turn the lights on. We'll just leave you with this. Thank you for your patience. Christianity wasn't given to us. Christianity was redesigned and then forced it upon us like it was the real article. Christianity flowed out of the African heartland, codified in ancient Kemet, for the purposes, literally, of bringing a segment of the world closer to the divine, through ritual, through sacrifice, and through connection to cosmic movements. And a measure of all that has happened to the world is reflected in this reality that the Christianity that we know today is truly a perverted message. Our task is to remember the message. Remember the message. Remembering is absolutely essential for anything that we hope to accomplish in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Charles Finch. Let's give him a warm round of applause. Dr. Charles Finch, the African roots of Christianity. Let's give him a warm round of applause. Dr. Charles Finch. Asante Sana, thank you very much. We're going to now hold hands, as we always say, as soon as the lectures are over, we immediately do our African affirmation. And I want to thank you tonight for no one leaving as soon as the speaker, or at least a couple people, just for my platitudes. But we want to thank you very much for this wonderful evening with Dr. Finch. And it's been a tremendous undertaking. I wish that there was a lot of Baptist preachers here tonight. A lot of holy rollers, I wish they was here tonight, in order to give some clarity to their own message. But you see, as long as we are in darkness, then they can thrive, you see. But there's always a rationale to every subject, you know, in order to give greater meaning and greater understanding. And I think that tonight we have certainly come that much closer to understanding the religions that we have given to the world, and unfortunately the perversions that they have been transformed into. Next week we'll be back here, as I indicated before. We have the Atlanta Pipeline next week. Attorney Lynn Watley and Lewis Clayton Jones will be dealing with the Wayne Williams conspiracy, and we will be kicking that off here to address that particular matter. And we want everybody to come out, and if there's anybody that you think that we should specially invite to be out next week as we embark on that mission, use the number on the back of your program and call and give the name of that person that you think should be specially invited, as well as the address of that person and the telephone number of that person, and we will make every effort to do so. Saturday morning, 8 a.m., we want everybody to come out to our monthly membership meeting, those who are members of the United African Movement. We have some very serious business to discuss. Of course, over the next day or so,